You worked in the White House, and whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you have to really be concerned about the institution of the White House and the presidency. Can this be anything but a bad thing for the institution of the White House when you have people openly writing anonymously that they're going to do what they can to really frustrate the President of the United States?
Well, I see it quite differently. I think this is an anomaly in history. There have been times in the White House where I worked and in the Bush White House where you had differences of opinion among policy advisors. Sometimes you had a disgruntled staffer leave and publish a book. That's one category. This is a totally different category where someone apparently close to the president is questioning his fitness for office. I can't think of another time in history where that's happened. We're in uncharted waters here. Now, your question is to the functioning of the White House. Well, there's an old saying that the fish rots from the head first. The executive, the person of the president, ultimately is responsible for how a White House is functioning. And I think there's real question here about whether this president is competent mentally, ethically, and otherwise to be president of the United States. That's the issue that's been raised here. That's different.
Well, it's the issue raised, Dave, without a question. But he was elected, duly elected by the people of the United States. And unless and until he is replaced, unless somebody determines through appropriate channels that he's not fit to be in office, then aren't we bound, actually, to follow his directions?
Well, the 25th Amendment, I think maybe what you're referring to in terms of appropriate means for removing a president without impeachment. And there is, of course, that role that the Constitution has established. But it's clear that that amendment applies to the staff working for the president, the cabinet. In other words, it didn't give the right to Congress. It didn't even give the right to courts. It said the people working for the president under the 25th Amendment are the ones who take action. So in a way, this is consistent with the 25th Amendment, that you have somebody inside the White House saying this man is not fit to be president. And in that sense, it's a good thing. I guess the one thing I would say that's a bad thing here is we have Republicans both within the White House, as we've learned, and on Capitol Hill who are essentially covering for this president because they want the Judge Kavanaughs of the world, or they want their tax cut, or they want deregulation. How far do you take that principle when it's so clear that there are people right next to the president saying he's not competent? Will the Republicans in Congress continue to prop up this person who, by this staffer's own description, is not qualified, is not mentally fit to be president? That, I think, is something that kind of ties together the Kavanaugh hearings with this op-ed. In other words, the Republicans may want Kavanaugh's and other judges like him to be nominated, but are they willing to put up with further propping up a president who's being called into question for his mere competence?
And we'll get to the Kavanaugh hearings, but let me just continue on this point, because you're clearly not a fan of the president. But if you think about it strategically, doesn't it make more sense to be part of the resistance quietly instead of just releasing this op-ed that's going to go viral and you have the president attacking and also trying to find who the leak is?
Well, I guess you're asking whether I think the tactics that were deployed here by somebody internal were right or wrong. I think there are lots of different ways to look at it. You could say, well, you know, if you feel that strongly about this president being unfit for office, why not call for invoking the 25th Amendment? I would certainly agree with that. But, you know, I was Deputy Staff Secretary to President Clinton, and I learned a lot about how the internal machinations of the White House work. And there have always been cases where somebody has leaked inappropriately or tried to skew a policy decision one way or another by publishing things anonymously. That is not unusual. I think it's something every White House has had to deal with, and President Obama dealt with it rather harshly when somebody would step out of line. I do think, though, in this case, it's not the management of the president per se that's in question. What's being raised here is his competency, and that is actually an important thing to raise. I just wish, in this case, people would come out of the shadows, Republicans in Congress would come forward and simply say, okay, we do believe that this president is unfit for office. That would be the appropriate thing at this time.